We generally associate flooding disasters with areas prone to torrential downpours and wildly fluctuating river levels. Southeast Asia in particular is estimated to have around 1.2 billion people living under a constant threat of flooding. However, in January of 1919, the city of Boston was hit with an absolutely bizarre and highly destructive flood that had nothing to do with rain. It was molasses. Yes, molasses. The dark, syrupy liquid extracted from sugarcane. The Great Molasses Flood occurred when a massive storage tank holding 8 million liters of molasses suddenly exploded. The Boston waterfront area was submerged by a deluge of thick, black liquid that decimated buildings, roads, and houses, and it claimed 21 lives, injuring dozens more. In what's been described as Boston's Pompeii, some waves of molasses were estimated to have traveled at speeds of up to 56 kilometers or 35 miles an hour. The sheer volume of molasses meant that these waves were huge, tsunami-like, in fact. Some were up to 10 meters high and 40 meters in width. As bizarre as it sounds, it must have been terrifying. People were peacefully going about their daily business when suddenly there was a frightening crashing sound, and almost instantly the streets were awash with waves of corn syrup. Cleaning up the city took weeks, and the flooding was so widespread that the stench of molasses hung in the Boston air long after the disaster took place. The damage wreaked on properties, vehicles, and the nearby infrastructure was significant. Worst of all was the shocking number of casualties, with men, women, and children all amongst the desperately unlucky 21 Bostonians who died. So how? How did it happen? Who and what was responsible for the tank exploding? The blame game shortly began, and fingers were pointed everywhere. It soon became clear that there were several factors leading up to the flooding. However, the ultimate fault came to land at the feet of U.S. Industrial Alcohol, who had owned the tank. But first of all, why did they need such a massive supply of molasses? Boston was traditionally a major distiller of rum, which is made from molasses syrup. For a long time, Boston played a key role in what was known as the triangular trade. The British colonies in Jamaica and Barbados produced molasses from the plentiful Caribbean sugar crops. The molasses was then shipped to Boston, where it was distilled into rum. Rum supplies were then sent across the Atlantic to Africa, where they were traded for slaves. The slaves were brought up to the British colonies, more molasses was picked up, and it was shipped north, and so on it went. On top of being a major part of rum production, molasses was also used to make industrial alcohol. Industrial alcohol has several uses, but its most important was in the manufacturing of ammunition. With the onset of World War I, the demand for industrial alcohol soared, as did the need for molasses. The industrial alcohol was used to produce cordite, which was used in ammunition and artillery shells. In 1915, U.S. Industrial Alcohol began building a huge molasses supply tank. It was a fairly hurried job because construction of the tank began in freezing Massachusetts winter, and demand was increasing for molasses supply. As a result, some crucial parts of the tank construction were either overlooked or simply rushed through. The investigation into the causes of the explosion began almost immediately after the flooding. Civil and structural engineers were called in to study the remnants of the tank. Those who worked on its construction were subjected to intense questioning. It soon became evident that there were some serious structural flaws. For starters, the tank walls were deemed to be too thin, incapable of withholding such large volumes of molasses. On top of that, the rivets used to hold the plates together were too small and unsuitable for such a large tank. This meant that there was tremendous stress on the rivet holes, which led to leaking. The leaking tank was no secret. Children in the neighborhood would often run over to the tank with cups, hoping to catch some of the leaking molasses goodness. In a feeble effort to conceal the leaks, employees were instructed to cover holes with molasses-colored paint. But a further concern was that the tank wasn't initially tested for its capability by filling it with water first. This was the usual procedure to make sure that the construction was sound with no danger of leakage. But U.S. Industrial Alcohol was on a tight deadline, and time was of the essence, so no tests. The tank had only been filled to capacity 4 times, with the most recent being 2 days before the disaster. A ship from Puerto Rico had come up delivering a whopping 7 million liters, 2.3 million gallons of molasses. This filled the tank, meaning it was holding enough molasses to fill 3.5 Olympic swimming pools. The fresh delivery of warm molasses was mixed in with the much colder existing supply. When the two differing temperatures were combined, it most likely created gas and increased the air pressure inside the tank. People had even noticed strange groaning noises coming from the tank in the days leading up to the explosion. It simply couldn't be contained any longer. When the tank burst open just after midday on January 15th, the nearby streets were drowned in a massive wave of molasses. It was around 10 meters high and 50 meters wide, destroying anything inside of its path. Train tracks were ripped up, buildings were leveled, and cars and trucks were washed away. 5-ton trucks were picked up and thrown through the air. The government building close to the tank was reduced to rubble within a mere matter of seconds. Any people or animals unlucky enough to be in the way were either suffocated or washed into the nearby harbor. Others were hit by debris and wreckage from cars and buildings. To make matters worse, the initially smooth-flowing sea of molasses began to thicken with the cooling temperatures. As night approached, the molasses took a heavy and viscous texture, not unlike a sea of dark glue. This made rescuing anybody stuck in that sticky syrup even more difficult. The rescue attempts continued for another 4 days, as bodies were found in the harbor and often where they stood, in the streets or in buildings. Many were so thickly covered in deadly molasses that it was almost impossible to identify them. Others who hadn't been washed into the water weren't found until months later. As the cleanup got underway, an official investigation was launched. Naturally, U.S. Industrial Alcohol was thought to be largely to blame and accused of extreme negligence in the construction of the tank. The company hit back with claims that anarchists had set off a bomb that destroyed the tank. While there indeed had been a series of anarchist-related bombings over the past year or so in the Boston area, it was ultimately deemed that that wasn't very likely. Rather, U.S. Industrial Alcohol was found to have grossly neglected its responsibilities in the construction, as well as the supervision and the maintenance of the tank. They were ordered to pay $1 million in damages, which equates to around $17 million today. The one positive to come out of the Great Molasses Flood was a tightening of procedures and guidelines related to future tank and storage facilities. Boston has undoubtedly had one of the more colorful and fascinating histories amongst American cities, and the Great Molasses Flood is easily one of the most bizarre chapters in that book of dramas and incidents relating to the almighty Bean Town.